We're live now, Chairman.
Hello.
Thank you, Louise. Okay, so welcome to this meeting of the Education Advisory Panel. This meeting is being held remotely and members are in attendance via video conferencing. The meeting is being live streamed and will also be available for repeated viewing. I will begin by naming the members who are in attendance for the public record. During the meeting, if a member wishes to speak, they will indicate this to me and I will call them to speak in turn. I would like to remind members that the County Council's standing orders continue to apply, so please keep your microphone muted unless you have been called to speak, and you may be visible on screen to the public and to other members even when you are not speaking. Okay, so if I do the attendance, so myself, Councillor Ros Chad, then Councillor Zilia Brooks, Councillor Jackie Branson.
Present.
We have apologies from Councillor Fran Carpenter, Councillor Gavin James.
Present.
Councillor Kirsty North.
Present.
Councillor Jackie Porter.
Present.
Councillor Patricia Stallard.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Michael Westbrook.
Present.
Then we're going to our co-opted members.
Sorry, you've gone on mute, Chairman.
Sorry about that. So our co-opted members, Dawn Casson, the Hampshire Primary Schools representative.
Present.
Joanna West, Hampshire Secondary Schools representative. Justine Ines, the Hampshire Special Schools.
It's Innes, Chair, but present, yes.
Catherine Hobbs, Captain the Catholic Church. Reverend Jeff Williams. Georgina Mulhall.
Yes, here.
And Ian Potter.
Yes, here.
Brilliant. Okay, so if we move to, have I missed anyone who is present?
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I went offline
Sorry.
for a few seconds. I maybe missed you calling me.
Councillor Bolton. We have as well.
Present,
who is
Chairman.
good. Thank you. So if I move to item 1, apologies for absence. So we've had apologies received from Councillor Fran Carpenter, and Councillor Ray Bolton is deputising for her at this meeting. Thank you, Ray, for standing in. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Remind members, if you have any declarations at any time today in any of the items that are discussed, can you declare them now or at this time of that item is being discussed, please? Jackie, have you got something?
Only it's a non-prejudicial interest. It's a personal interest. I'm a governor of a school.
Do we have anyone else that wants to declare an interest now?
I have a child at a school, but I think that's kind of a standard thing that's going to be a case for another 2 years. So.
Yeah, same here. Gavin.
Do you need to know we're governors at schools, because aren't we all?
Not all of us are, but we can put that down, Jackie, as well for you.
Okay. And I have a granddaughter at school.
Okay, so item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting, which was held a long time ago on the 27th of November 2019, when the world was very, very different. Does anyone have any concerns in regards to those minutes? I take it we've all read them. Are you happy for me to agree those? Yeah, I can see lots of nodding of heads. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Yes. Thank you. Item 4 is deputations. We haven't received any deputations for today's meeting, and then moves us nicely on to item 5, which is chairman's announcements. And I apologise. I will keep it as brief as I can, but I just want to take the opportunity to say some thank yous. So I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all the head teachers and staff in our schools who during this pandemic are continually working hard to keep their school families safe and to keep our children in education and maintain an essence of normality for those young people. I know it has come with many, many challenges, and I am so grateful to you all for the amazing work that you are doing and the amazing people that we have in our schools. I'd also like to take the opportunity to mention our young people who have shown great resilience and have adapted to all the changes that have had to be made in our schools. In conversations with them, they have been positive about what's going on and have always had smiles on their faces. Although we appreciate that schools aren't normal at the moment, you are all doing a great job, and we really, really appreciate the job that our young people are doing. And I look forward to hearing about all the school trips and swimming lessons and sports competitions again very, very soon, hopefully. I also couldn't let this moment pass without saying a big thank you to Brian and his team. The support you have given and continue to give our schools is greatly appreciated by them and by members.
Hear, hear.
Also like to add a thanks to all our members for helping our schools when they've needed it, for asking questions and just being there as part of that support mechanism as well. So that's it from me, and just a big thank you to everyone. That moves us on to agenda item.
Can I just add to that, Ros? I think sometimes we forget our learning support assistants, and they have really, come up to the mark, and they've done such a good job. And sometimes I think they get forgotten in our thank yous. So just like to add that.
Thank you, Jackie. I did put down all staff, otherwise I'd have been listing, forever, because everyone has done an amazing job in our schools. They really, really have. It's been wonderful to see. The events are unfortunate, but actually how everyone's pulled together has been amazing. It really has. So item 6 is an update on COVID-19. This will be delivered by Brian and Leanne Simmons, who is the head teacher of Ringwood School. Thank you, Leanne, for attending today. We really appreciate it. I'll hand over to Brian. I don't know if are you happy to take questions as we go, or would you want to wait until the end?
I have a few slides, Councillor Chad, so if I can go through a few slides, which you may well recognise because Steve stole my Education Advisory Panel slides for a different purpose yesterday. So I have a few slides to introduce the item. Very happy to stop at the end of those, only 10 of them, and to take any questions. And then I just thought it would be useful for members to have a head teacher come along and talk about her personal experience of having cases and how she dealt with those, because I thought that would give you an interesting insight. Obviously, we've got other head teachers that are on the panel as well who will be able to add from their perspective, but I did think formally it would be good if it was myself as a general introduction and then Leanne from Ringwood to give some further info. So I'll do my best to load my presentation up to the screen, if that's okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Are they showing?
Yep.
Yes, they are.
And they're in display mode and everything, are they?
Yes, they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first slide, just to share the national ambition. This was in the DFE guidance that came out in November, but it's been basically the national ambition throughout, and I don't see this changing as we come out of lockdown into the different tiered system, and we'll know which tier we're in presumably at some time over the next few days. The one bit that appears to be unwavering is the commitment from government to keep schools open. So it looks like that national ambition is here to stay for the foreseeable future. I thought members you would be interested in just looking at some attendance statistics. So primary attendance nationally is about 88% of children are in nationally. In Hampshire, that's about 92%. So we've got a higher proportion of our children in primary schools than is the case nationally. And you'll see there's quite a difference actually between secondary attendance and the national figure, 7 percentage points higher. Normally, when you look at attendance statistics, typically it's around about 95% attendance in a kind of normal year, just to kind of give you the benchmark for that. And usually between authorities, you see 0.1, 0.2 of a difference. So those differences between Hampshire and the national stats, I think, are quite significant. They're taken from a DfE daily attendance feed, and those were the figures on the 19th of November, so last Thursday, I think that is. They only include the schools that submit the daily return, and it's not a statutory requirement, so not all schools return it. It's about 70% nationally and about 80% in Hampshire. The other stat, because I know you share my passion around the vulnerable children and making sure that they are getting access to education. So those children with a social worker, 78% of those children are in nationally, 83% in Hampshire. So again, a significant difference. And also those children with an EHCP nationally, 78%, and again, Hampshire 6 percentage points above the national average there. So those figures are building in Hampshire. We're seeing increased numbers, and that's been the case since September, and indeed actually during the first lockdown. I just thought this would be interesting to set it in context. And again, these statistics I took from last Thursday. So as of last Thursday, we had 270 schools that had had a positive case. We've got 533 schools in Hampshire, so you can see that that's about half the schools have had a positive case, which of course means that half the schools have yet to have a case. Those schools are tending to be primary schools. Most secondary schools now have had a case, obviously because of the size of them. It's statistically more likely you're going to get a case in a secondary school. You can see there the number of cases that we've had reported to the local authority involving staff, and the number of cases we've had there involving children and young people. And again, I thought that would be interesting to put that in context. We have about 10,000 teachers at any one time across academies and maintained schools, and about 180,000 children attending school. So that kind of puts those into some sort of context. Learning support assistants and office staff, again, there's around about 10,000 of those across the system. I thought again, none of this is surprising, and particularly for the head teachers on the panel. I guess this is why we are head teachers. This is the SAGE advice on school closures, which came out on the 13th of November. So, I mean, what it says is schools do make a difference, and if you close schools, then attainment gaps increase. Opportunities for early identification of emerging learning problems are missed when schools are closed. Educational outcomes are put at risk, particularly disadvantaged students. You'll see in the brackets there are different confidence levels that SAGE as a scientific community have put on those. And obviously there's been peer review of that first one, which I think we'd all accept anyway, of having high confidence. School closures cause impairment to the physical and mental health of children. Mental health of adolescents particularly affected. Cognitive, social, emotional development outcomes also at risk, as is physical health. Perhaps less, I don't know whether it's surprising or not, there's an adverse impact as well on vulnerable children because of the access to other services, and you can think about social care services in there as well, and other lockdown related stressors such as the impact on economic uncertainty. So extended periods of remote learning can lead to poorer educational outcomes. That's low confidence at the moment. There's lots of research being done on that. I just wanted to outline the members what happens when we do have a positive case, and there is a flow chart which I'll circulate as a PDF after the meeting because it's clearer than it is showing up on the slide. But in simple terms, if a school has a positive case, whether that be a member of staff or a child, if it's just one case, they ring a DFE hotline, which is staffed by public health professionals. And in the most simplistic of cases, where it is one teacher and one bubble needs to self-isolate, that team have the professional knowledge to give that straightforward advice to head teachers. If there are more than one case, or if it's complicated and is going to involve a lot of children self-isolated, those are tending to be moved to the local health protection team, who are the most experienced and most qualified public health professionals. And I've had some fantastic feedback from head teachers about how good the advice and straightforward the advice is from the local health protection team when those professionals are brought in. So more complicated cases go to them, and they undertake a risk assessment with head teachers as to who shouldn't self-isolate. Because of the complexity of special schools and indeed pupil referral units, our education centres, they don't go to the DFE hotline, they go to the local health protection team, because obviously some of the children there are, many of the children there are very vulnerable, and we need to make sure they've got the most experienced professionals from public health on the line. We've had support to schools throughout, and again, pay my tribute to colleagues in schools, head teachers, teachers, all of the staff have worked so hard in trying to get things right and to open schools to ensure that children have access to education. It's been a first-class, outstanding performance in my view across the sector. So public health have been providing high quality advice, which is informing decision making. We do have our own local authority public health team, and I have to say some of those have been absolutely outstanding when schools have needed some advice and we've needed to pull people in rapidly when things have been going wrong. One of the teams I manage, the school improvement team, have been there throughout. Head teachers have wanted sometimes just conversations with somebody else in education as to what they might do. They've supported around implementing the public health advice where that's been needed. They've supported around giving advice around remote learning, and also we've had seminars, particularly in the primary sector, around the recovery curriculum, and they've been very well attended by head teachers who again speak warmly about the advice being given. And then finally, the communications team, particularly Diana Leahy, who's been given advice on communications with parents. She's worked on lots of different letters, and when we've had media inquiries, she's supported head teachers in dealing with those as well. And my final slide, and the apocryphal stories are the ones that always get circulated around the head teacher community. And what I wanted to do was to take a more strengths-based approach and to talk about some of the things where things are going right. So I just wanted to spend a slide which shows some of the outstanding responses we've had from schools. And I'm not saying this is what every single head teacher must do, because obviously different contexts are different, but these have been some interesting and some good practice that's taken place. So there's been some great work now on record keeping, and many head teachers are keeping really detailed seating plans of who sat where during what lesson, and some have even gone as far as to take photographs of the class. So when they've then had a positive case, they've been able to ascertain very rapidly who's been within 2 meters or 1 meter, and they've been able to feed that advice into public health, which has led to less students and staff needing to self-isolate because of some of the proactive work in the preparation stage. Again, some great work around bubble integrity, trying to make sure that bubbles don't cross. And that's extended to making sure that different bubbles have got different start times, different finish times, different drop-off points, different collection points. It's extended to having different play times, different break times, different lunch times. Even in some schools where there've been access to communal facilities like toilets, you know, those have all been kind of factored in to maintain bubble integrity. Face masks, I know, was very controversial in the early stages, and heads have worked really hard to try and make sure we get consistent messages with young people in secondary schools, particularly around the use of face masks and particularly when using public transport. Councillor Chad, you'll know that when we went and visited Porchester Secondary School recently, there were hand sanitisers everywhere, and you know, that is the case in schools. Lots and lots of hand sanitised everywhere, so that there's no excuses for people not keeping their hands clean. The comms, I think, have been exemplary in many schools, educating the children, explaining really carefully the expectations so the children know how to act. Great communications with staff, so everybody's been really clear on expectations, and again, some great communications with the parental community as well to try and keep them on board as well. Some super work, and we often mention teachers and support staff. You know, the cleaning teams in many of our schools have done a first-rate job, and you know, cleaning places directly after they've been used, making sure they're fit for the next group. Been really good. Remote teaching, I just mentioned, so teachers that have had to self-isolate but are still well. I've insisted to many head teachers they want to carry on teaching their class, so we've had teachers beamed in rather like I am now from my living room to their class so they could carry on teaching their classes. The remote learning that schools have put in place this term has been incredibly sophisticated, and I think we've learned an enormous amount about what learning works best remotely from the first lockdown. And I was in Crookhorn School week last Friday, and I was incredibly impressed with the sophisticated set of arrangements they've put in place. And then there's some great work around recovery curriculum and getting children back on track. Clearly, it's not the same as normal times. As you said, Councillor Chad, in your introduction, many of the things that would be happening in schools can't happen because of the pandemic, but it's not for want of trying. Staff, teachers, the children are working incredibly hard to try and make sure that some of the lost learning that took place, we are eating it into that and trying to get children back on track. So I'll leave it there and take some questions if that's helpful.
Does anyone? Oh, Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Echo all what you said about the staff and what Councillor Chad said previously about everybody that's been working overtime on this, right down to even to there was a thorough cleaning that's necessary. I just have two quick questions which we've sort of touched on before. The first one is about the IT for remote learning. I think you mentioned to us in a previous meeting, the Children and Young People's meeting, that the IT equipment was being made available by the DFE, and that was getting out there quickly, making sure that all vulnerable children have got that. I wanted to make sure also that I don't know if we ever actually got a clear answer about the data for that, because obviously it's all very well having a laptop or a piece of equipment to use remotely, but there's also the data costs of that for families and how that's being managed and whether that's being made available. And my second question really is around the school gates, which is a little bit outside of the school, obviously. But having picked my grandson up on a number of occasions, they are very, very busy places, and they've tried their best to sort of put one-way systems in, but they become quite busy places where people congregate. So I wonder if there's been any issues there, whether that seems to be working okay. That's my 2 points, really.
I think your first question on the remote learning is a good one. It's one that schools have worked incredibly hard on, and it's not just about disadvantaged students. I remember talking to the head teacher of Cams Hill, and actually what she was finding was it wasn't the disadvantaged necessarily that were struggling with getting access to IT, but quite a few middle class families as well. Typically during lockdown, mums and dads may well be working from home, and there may well be a laptop or even 2 laptops in the family, But if you've got mum remote working, dad remote working, actually there are some times in the day where it's very difficult for the children also to have access. So it's multiple devices with broadband that then can cope with all that additionality as well. So I'm not going to pretend that I think the IT solutions are all fixed, because I don't think they are, Councillor Westbrook. There's still more to do. What I would say is it's something school leaders have worked really hard at, and I know they've brought a number of laptops themselves. They have got the DFE DAP laptops in some circumstances, but we're still working on it. So I'll give you an example this morning. Knights Enham Junior School, the head teacher contacted me last night to say she got 5 students that had got laptops, but actually they lived in a place where the Wi-Fi was particularly bad, and I've got our computing inspector going around the school tonight after work to drop off 5 dongles. So we are able to respond when we do get those requests, but it's not an easy one. It's by no means fixed. The second question on school gates is every head teacher's nightmare at the moment, and you can't win on it. We've had complaints in from parents because head teachers have overstepped the mark and tried to ensure social distancing of parents when they've got no power to do so. According to parents, we've had other parents who say that we're not taking things far enough, and head teachers should be far more draconian with dropping off and picking up time. So it's a really difficult area, I think, for heads to navigate. What they have done is to try and communicate really carefully with parents as to what the expectations are. They have tried to separate start and finish times. They have used one-way systems where they can have separate drop-off and pick-up points. I know they've tried that as well, but getting some parents to abide by that is quite a challenging experience, and actually it's led to some tension between parents and heads. It's not been an easy area to manage.
No, thank you, Brian. I mean, on the first point, that's good that obviously we do have broadband issues and things, and it's good that that's being looked at and continue to be looked at. I think we've got stuff coming up at committee shortly on broadband and the rollout of that. It makes it even more important, really, especially some of the rural areas. With regards to school gates, so my experience is the one-way systems are in place, but to go closer to the school to collect your grandchild or your child is quite difficult, because then you get in really, really tight areas. What we've been doing is that the children have been allowed, especially of certain age, allowed to run out to the school sort of area, to the edge of the school, where someone like me is waiting there to pick them up. It's a bit of hide and seek. Where's your grandson gone? But that seems to be working reasonably well where I've been in my experience, and what a difficult situation. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Councillor Westbrook. The next person I've got down is Councillor Jackie Branson.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly in Crookhorn, we started with staggered starts, to go back to Councillor Westbrook, and we gave that up because it meant people were congregating outside, so we gave up the staggered starts. But yes, Brian, when you have the figures of attendance, does that include the children that are socially isolating at home? That's the first question.
No, it's the attendance codes. What they are is if you are if you can't come in for a COVID related reason, that has got its special code. They don't actually count as being in attendance on those figures. So okay. Those figures are pulled down because there are children that are self-isolating at home.
Yeah, that's interesting, because certainly my daughter's primary school, 2 whole year groups were home. Perhaps you can explain why. Is it in primary schools they tend to send the whole bubble home, which is the whole year group, whereas in secondary schools they have better ways of only sending certain children around? Or is that general, or is that just my experience? Certainly in my daughter's school, they send the whole bubble home, the whole year group.
I think some of that may well be personal experience, but it is different in primary and secondary. In primary, one of the main mitigations is the bubble, because particularly with very young children, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, you simply can't ask them to stay 2 meters apart. So typically in a year R class, if a child becomes positive, then yes, the whole bubble has to self-isolate. Some primary schools are organising in single classes, some are organising in year groups. So sometimes it can be just one class, sometimes it can be two classes or three, depending on how many's in the year group. With secondary schools, it's depended. So in some cases, it's been quite small numbers. So if I give you for instance there, Fern Hill School, for example, they had a teacher that tested positive. That teacher had taught 8 classes. Because we got photographs and maps of every class, we could work out there was only 6 children in each of those 8 classes that needed to self-isolate. So that was 48 children that self-isolated. I could also talk about another school where we had a year 9 child during a break time go round and hug and kiss 90 other children on the playground.
Oh no.
Now we used CCTV and managed to track down 70 of the people that had been kissed, but couldn't work out who the other 20 were. So in that case, we had to then self-isolate the whole year group. So it really, that's the level of detail we're getting into when we get a case as to who self-isolates and who doesn't.
I certainly know that that's what they do at Crookhorn from the point of view of test. That was track and trace that they have there. But certainly in my granddaughter's school, they sent home year 1 and year 4. So it was quite a high percentage of the school. Just one last thing. Obviously, you've talked about hand sanitize and extra cleaning. I just wondered, have the schools had extra money in their budgets for this? Because it has cost them quite a considerable amount.
Not enough would be my answer to that. So yes, there was an ability to claim some money from the government, but that was during the initial phases. There isn't now. I have made representations to the Department for Education, saying I think they should be more open to meeting the full costs of COVID that are falling on schools. I know Steve has done the same, and I know the professional associations and head teachers are also making their voices heard as well. There is a cost of COVID, and in my view, I think the government should be assisting schools with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ros.
Thank you, Councillor Branson. Councillor Jackie Porter, please.
Thank you, and thank you for that really good representation of what's going on in schools. And I just see my teachers starting to look a little bit more grey around the edges at the end of term. Really pleased to be seeing the end of term, because I think it's a very challenging situation to be in day to day. So two or three positive things really. One is the governor's training has been so popular, but unfortunately it's been so popular that we've all been charged with getting on training courses, but it's quite difficult at the moment because they're all full up. So from governor's point of view, I think because of the remote learning that we're doing online, it's proving to be more popular than normal training. So is there any opportunity of pretty much upskilling the governors more during this time? And also potentially the strength-based learning for parents too. You mentioned about remote learning. There are places, in fact, where even dongles don't work particularly well, and I wondered if we're going to be thinking about how we take that forward, and whether there is a potential for our local libraries, for instance, to be looking after that, our small libraries, particularly those that aren't open very much, whether they could be open for supporting those children. The other thing, most importantly, really, are we doing any research on what sorts of remote learning works? I know that some of the big organisations like Pearson's are also looking at that and have been doing remote learning in places like Australia for decades and America. I wondered, are you doing any work, or as our highest team, actually looking at remote learning as a long-term solution?
Thank you for that. Good to know the governor training is proving popular. I'll take your comment back to Mandy Parsons about whether we can increase the amount of training we're putting on at the moment. And some things won't go back to normal, I think, Jackie, at the end of this. And I think governor training, instead of bringing people together from all over the county, clearly some of that can be online. I think that's a helpful way going forward. What I would say is some of the training involving teachers I don't think can translate as well online. If you're really interested in looking at the way children progress across, say, year 2 in reading, you do need access to books, you need access to talk to children. It's much more difficult online to do something meaningful there that impacts on practice. But I'll take that back to Mandy. With parents and remote learning, yes, we have undertaken a piece of research where we've talked to a large number of head teachers about remote learning, and we did produce a paper to reflect back what heads were saying had worked and what hadn't worked, and sent that out to schools at the beginning of term. I'm happy to send you a copy of that. It's a kind of discussion piece on remote learning. I'll make sure you get a copy, Jackie, if that's okay. Agree entirely about remote learning looking forward, although my own view again there is, I don't think that, honestly, I say this with great honesty, I don't think the children make as much progress when they are learning remotely as they do being in a class. And the reason for that is when you look at the core elements of what makes up good learning, fundamental to that is the opportunity for peers to talk together, to debate issues, to work together. And, if I'm doing gears and pulleys with year 6 in design technology, I may do some introductions that work well online, but actually when I say to them, what I'd now like you to do is to cooperate as a group and design a fairground ride, it doesn't really work, that kind of learning online.
No, and I appreciate that, but I think that's the point, isn't it? That is the point, that some people that we are all seeing that learning takes place instantly, but it doesn't necessarily stay in. And I just wondered if you had at the end of this, it sounds like you are producing a what works guide. We
have, and fundamentally, and I don't think there any surprises in it. Those heads that tried to do lots of live teaching, what they found when the children came back to school is much of that hadn't stuck. So I'm going to be disrespectful for maths teachers. I hope there's not a maths teacher on the call at the moment. Many maths teachers would love to teach a maths class where they put the children on mute and talk for an hour. It doesn't necessarily mean the children are understanding the concepts, because what you need to do is to check the understanding, to give them children a sort of problem to undertake, to then look at how they've got around solving that, to see what learning and misconception they've got before you go on to the next teaching point. Just live teaching on its own is quite challenging. So it's been a mixture of some live teaching, some pre-recorded teaching, where particularly children with special needs can overlearning by listening and watching it several times, coupled with some activities as extension tasks as well. So there have been some interesting lessons that have come out of it.
Yeah, I didn't want to target maths teachers in particular, but I was actually more concerned about finding ways in which particularly young people who don't attend school full time might have their learning supplemented within the school week, to make sure they get their 25 hours of education and meaningful education. So certainly that's something that I'm interested in seeing long term.
Okay, yeah. The final bit you asked, Jackie, was about libraries. The problem we've got with that, of course, is if we ask children to go home and self-isolate, they have to do exactly that. They're not allowed to go and attend a library. They are self-isolating and should be staying indoors. But for the long term, you're quite right, libraries could be areas that are used and actually are used by some home educating groups.
Thank you, Jackie. Just to highlight, Georgina's just put in the chat that there are some case studies that she's aware of that have outlined that some children have really thrived at home. So just if people hadn't seen it.
Can I interject? Is that okay?
Yep, go for it, Georgina, and then I've got to go to Councillor Ray Bolton.
sorry to jump in, but it just to follow on, I hear what Brian says. I think there are some children, some students who've absolutely actually thrived learning online. For some students who perhaps find school difficult for a variety of reasons, having that online offer has impacted really positively. And Jackie, I do have some case studies I can share if you would be interested in seeing those. And I think what this has enabled is for schools to really consider and understand what a blended learning model looks like, and has the pandemic has been a catalyst to outline how educators can provide that face-to-face as well as online, and look at how those two can be harmonized to enable a sound learning platform that can then be used in many ways, including a scenario that Jackie just outlined for those perhaps who can't have on-site provision all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgina. If you're happy to send those case studies to Louise so that everyone can have a look at them, that would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so next on the list is Councillor Ray Bolton. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Chairman. Brian, the future anti-COVID-19 vaccination programme. I haven't so far heard of teachers being a priority group. Is this being considered? Because at the moment we're seeing cases of our teachers testing positive for the virus, and it seemed to me to make sense that our teachers be vaccinated as soon as possible against it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bolton. And Ros, we probably ought to bring in Louise after this question, if that's okay. So the answer to that, unfortunately, at the moment, Ray, is no. And I've made several representations to the DfE, including through our MPs to ministers as well, around the flu vaccination. I find it shocking, to be frank, that teachers have not been able to be in the first wave of people having a flu vaccination. Keeping schools open at the moment is hard enough without losing staff to flu, so they can't come in and teach. You know, we've got staff shortages in a number of schools, and that's not helping. And we've had schools that have had vaccination programs with the flu booked with local pharmacists who have had to cancel them because of lack of vaccine. Certainly in many areas of the counties, they're still targeting the over 65s. I think they are now starting to do more people over 50, but it would have been good, I think, if we could have had some priority groups in there for teachers as well. And I think the same will be true again with the vaccine for COVID. It looks to me as though they're going to target the over 80s, the over 85s as the first group, then the over 70s. There's been little chatter, and I have raised it again with the DfE about prioritising teachers as a group. And you're right, it would be good, I think, if possible.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Councillor Bolton. I do have a question from Ian Potter, and then I'd like to hear from Leanne, please. So, Ian, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Councillor Chad. No, it was a response to what Councillor Porter was saying, and that dialogue with Brian on what is going to be the future of schooling, of sort of following what we learned from the pandemic. And as Georgina was saying, we are learning very much from the pandemic how we can reach a diversity of learners in a way that the one-size-fits-all design of schooling doesn't do in quite the same way. And Brian's dead right. You can't do a facsimile of what goes on in the classroom online. And some fantastic developments are happening at the moment of how you do alter your pedagogy when you're teaching online. Training companies in the commercial world are pushing forward in learning how to deliver training, etc., to online, and that many people are going to be driven by that from the sustainability model of, if you like, trainers not having to fly all around the world in order to deliver it because they're finding it does work online. So, and who would have believed that Netflix would ever get to a situation where we didn't have to watch things when they were transmitted on television? the idea of on-demand media within our homes is something we wouldn't have dreamed of 20 years ago. And of course, we've got Harrow that's offering an entire sixth form provision online. So for those of us who have been in education as long as I have, these are really pushing my mind to understand these things. But I do think we're at a really interesting time, and I think any talk of sort of eulogizing the old normal is something that I feel I have a responsibility to try and encourage people like me not to be stuck in that sort of thinking.
Thank you, Ian. Leanne, the floor is yours. We would love to hear about your experience in your school, please.
Thank you very much. Brian's asked me to be quite brief, so I'll try and be brief, but he's asked me to cover the following points. And that is sort of, first of all, what did we put in place in September to reopen schools? And Brian's covered lots and lots of the things that we've done, but I'll just talk a little bit more about what that's looked like on the ground for us. He's asked me to talk about what happens when you have a case, and particularly a more complicated case. We've had a more complicated case, so I'll talk you through what happened with that one. A little bit about how we're ensuring that children continue to learn, and we've talked a little bit this morning about the remote learning and the blended learning, particularly with relation, obviously, to disadvantaged children. I was going to talk just briefly about catch-up, because obviously the government has invested an awful lot of money in catch-up, and just talk to you about our approach here. And then finally, we're just about to start a trial tomorrow of a lateral flow antigen test for recognising COVID in a school on a kind of mass level. So I'll talk to you just briefly about that as well, because there are potential opportunities there, which will be quite exciting when we think about keeping children in school rather than having to isolate them. So if I start just by talking about what, the move to return to full schooling in September. First of all, for us, we're a site that's very, very, very packed. So most of our rooms are at 100% use all the time. And unfortunately for us, what that meant was that I couldn't divide my school up and say, Year 7 have got this block or this building or this set of classrooms and kind of keep them static. I know lots of my colleagues in the New Forest have been able to do that because they've just had a bigger site or just a bit more capacity in space. But we haven't had that. And actually, when we looked at modelling that, the minute I took all the science rooms out and gave them to a particular year group, if anybody else needed to do science, that meant we immediately had to move one group out. So it just wouldn't work. So in short, we've continued to move students rather than teachers around the school. That's meant bringing lots of other mitigations in, like lots more sanitisation, so lots of extra cleaning. And we have a sort of sanitisation regime now as a new class goes in, that all of the desks, and particularly if there are computers, the keyboards are sanitised. That's either via a wipe or via spray, and it's really up to the teacher how they do that. The waste and the cost is awful, but we have to manage that in order to be able to offer that full curriculum and have our children moving around into specialist classrooms. My teachers have really appreciated the fact that the students are moving rather than the teachers are moving. And I know that in places where it's the other way around, and some teachers are now having to move lots and lots of times during the day, that is more difficult. But of course, it is limiting the movement of the children, so there's a safety measure there as well. So it was a difficult decision to make, and we've tried to mitigate it as best we can. We talked about record keeping earlier on, and all of our seating plans are online, and they have to be accessible to the leadership team all of the time, because we have had cases at the weekend, cases in the holidays, and we have to be able to just immediately go to a central database and see exactly who's sitting where, and also know if it's a practical lesson, to know that a practical has happened. So for example, in science, if there has been a practical, the teacher will always log that in a separate place, and if we should have a positive case within that class, we know there's been a practical, and we know we can't rely on the seating plan because we know children will have been moving around in the classroom. So it's that sort of level. We've got very limited home learning club. That's about the only extracurricular thing we've got going on, but that's all logged really carefully. Detentions, we log a seating plan for who sat where. So anything that moves, we kind of log it at the moment, because that's what you have to do. Just like Brian talked about earlier on, we have zoning. So all of our students are now in coloured lanyards to show which year group they're in. They've got different gates that they enter by, and there's a staggered start to keep Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 and 5 separate and apart. That is challenging exactly for the reasons that were discussed earlier on, and it is really hard to separate people out, and you do your best, but when you've got 1,500 children pouring into a school within about a 20-minute period, it's absolutely a challenge. At break time, the students are zoned completely across the school, and they've got different areas that they're inhabiting and different toilets that they use. And we've got 3 lunch sittings at the moment, which is not what we normally have. Normally we just have 1, but we have those 3 lunch sittings so that we've not got any mixing of bubbles in lunch queues, using the canteen, and also in areas around the school. It just gives all the students a little bit more space and time. And that's been a challenge, because if you're on early lunch, you've got a much longer period to get through until the end of the school day, but that is as it was. In terms of hand sanitizer, we have hand sanitizer everywhere, and we ask all students to have their own hand sanitizer as well. And they're as part of the regime of arriving in a class, they sanitize their hands. That's just part of what they're doing. And we didn't start with masks, but we now are obviously all wearing masks, and sanitize and then remove your mask is our sort of ritual at the beginning of a lesson. Extra cleaning, as I said, around and about the school, so the common touch points, the banisters, door handles, are particularly the toilets. And I've got cleaning staff who just spend their time cleaning stuff all day, every day, which is reassuring for staff. They're very pleased to see all of those common areas being cleaned as often as we possibly can. In terms of being in the classroom, our staff who were more vulnerable, we've taken extra measures and had put in their risk assessment when they were coming back in September, to ensure that they stayed a 2-metre distance. They've got sort of taped boxes on the floor so that they have got their zone, and students have got a zone where they don't come into their box, to ensure that that distancing could take place. Also, because teachers now are remaining at the front, we invested in mini whiteboards for all students when we came back in September, so that the very frequent assessment, exactly those things that we were talking about, make it really hard to assess how children are understanding when you're teaching remotely. We knew we'd have to go straight into a period of really intensely looking at what did you learn, what can you remember, what do you understand. So the whiteboards were really useful, particularly in the first half term, of getting very, very frequent feedback, particularly because a teacher can't wander around like they normally would and look over a shoulder, or just interrogate a little bit further with a child. What do you understand? Tell me about this. So that worked quite well. I know staff find it very difficult to teach from the front and just want to be getting into their classroom. And for behaviour management as well, there is just a usefulness about just being a presence around and about all of the tables in the classroom, which is compromised at the moment, and will continue to be until we're in a bit of a different position. We've moved lots of meetings electronically, and we've talked about the governor training just now, and actually think some things won't go back. We're really enjoying virtual parents' evenings. That's working so much better than the interesting experience of a parents' evening in a secondary school, where you have to walk quite big distances to get to teachers, the timing always goes wrong, and all of those things. So that seems to have been really, really positive, and very positive for our parents as well, who can just zoom in and have those conversations from home. They're very much enjoying that. So those are sort of the things that we put in place. I'll move on now to when we get a case. We've had 7 cases at Ringwood. We've had cases in Year 7, in Year 10, in Year 12, and 1 member of staff since about the middle of October till about the middle of November. Our last case was the 14th of November. And exactly as Brian described, when you get a case, you phone the helpline, and you then go through your period of identifying close contacts, so you're using your CT plans, but you're also using CCTV if the student is not particularly clear about who exactly they've walked to school with, who they've been with at break time, who they've been with at lunchtime. And our very first case was Year 7, and obviously they hadn't been at school for very long, so we had a really interesting bit where we were talking to the student about, so who do you play with at lunchtime? Well, I play with tall William, and there's this boy called Callum, and so that obviously needed CCTV because he didn't know the surnames of his friends, and we obviously had to go through the who exactly is William. So that's the process, and then you go through informing parents. We prefer to do that by telephone, so that you can talk parents through, and then those students go home, they isolate, and then they click into remote learning. which for us is mostly streamed lessons. And we'd invested in visualizers that all have webcams in them right at the beginning of, or right at the end of the summer, actually in July. We bought them before the price went up, so I was very pleased about that. So all classrooms now have the ability to stream, and students dial in using Microsoft Teams, and then the teacher will choose to have the webcam on them or on the board so that they can see what's going on. And we're trying to keep the learning as real as if the child was in the classroom. Doesn't always work, but that's the endeavour, so that when they come back into class, they've not missed out, they've not fallen further behind. And that type of learning is a bit different to remote learning when you're setting up a whole course, a bit like before the summer holidays, where weeks and weeks and weeks of learning was just remote only. It is slightly different when you're trying to, you've got some children out, you've got some children in, and you're trying to kind of keep everybody up together so that nobody falls behind. One more complex case that we had was a case in year 12, and it was more complex for several reasons. The first was the timing. The timing was horrible, and that was that we were informed of it at about 7 o'clock on the Friday night of half term. So really, really tricky. And I was telephoned by my facilities manager, who normally is a key person in all of this. He holds the CCTV, and he plays a really key role. He was in the middle of deepest, darkest Dorset at a campsite, and so we didn't kind of have any of the normal things that we would have around us. It was also a complete surprise to us because it was an asymptomatic case, and this young person had been going in for a medical test or medical procedure. Therefore, they'd taken a COVID test, and nobody realised that it was going to come back as positive, but it did. So our immediate action was to isolate the whole of the sixth form, and that's because at that point the whole of the sixth form were operating as one bubble, because they have 3 periods, so they mix, they have communal spaces like the study area and the cafe, and there is just an awful lot more mixing. And without looking in real time at sort of 48 hours worth of footage of CCTV to work out where our case had actually been, because our case also happened to be really, really, really sociable, so he had been here, there and everywhere. We isolated the whole of the sixth form. Now, obviously, on the eve of, just on the crest of half term, that was incredibly difficult, and our families found that incredibly difficult, and I can completely understand that. We then came in on the Monday, Sam came back from his holiday early, the head of sixth form came in, and that's when we started to work through much more detailed context. We were able to release people from isolation at that point, although they had the weekend in isolation. So that was difficult, but the reason it was complicated was that it became quite quickly apparent that some of the students that were going to be affected and were close contacts, so therefore had to isolate, were also students that were going to sit GCSE exams in the autumn series. And these are the students who were last year's year 11, who were not given the opportunity to sit their GCSE exams. And all the way through, they had been promised that if they were unhappy with their grades, they would have an opportunity to sit in the autumn. And as we began to look at the impact of this, particularly for English, because English happened on the 2nd and the 4th of November, which was the Monday and the Wednesday immediately as we came back from half term, as we looked at this, we realised there was no contingency, that unless a child could sit 25% of their exam, then they would just have to resit in the summer. That's how it would happen. There was no other autumn opportunity or anything like that. So it became, over the weekend, it became very clear that we had to, come whatever, find a way of making those or allowing those children to sit their public exams, because they had not been allowed to sit them in the summer. So with the help of Jean Thorpe, who's in Brian's school improvement team, who he talked about, who was absolutely just wonderful and a complete lifeline that weekend, she managed to get hold of the local health team, and we had a couple of conferences on the Monday where we worked together with us saying, we think we can make it work like this so that we can have a room that's just for the children that are isolating. We know we can absolutely distance them. They don't really have to come onto the school site because we can use the building that's situated in the car park, and we go through all of these measures. And in the end, we were able to successfully go forward with that. And the leadership team invigilated those exams rather than asking our invigilators, who are perhaps a bit older, and we just didn't want to put those in that position. So it turned out to be more complicated. We had to run many more exam venues, but those young people got to sit their exams, which was critically important. And it was thanks to the flexibility of the local public health team and that we were able to do that. And we were very, very grateful for that. But it it's those things that you don't realise at the time and you don't think about. We've never planned for that. It just kind of happened, and we were grateful for the professionals around us to help. So that was kind of what happens when you have a case. In terms of disadvantaged children, obviously sometimes just disadvantaged children are having to isolate. So for some of those children, we had secured a number of Google Chromebooks through a charity back in sort of June, July. So there are some families now who we've given those Chromebooks to. So they've got the ability to use the equipment, and we've also got the DFE laptops that we can also lend out if we need to. We use Microsoft Teams, and you can access that on your phone. And what we had found is that although it is very difficult when families don't have the number of devices that they need, actually most of our students have got a smartphone and they can access what they need. Although it might not be quite as comfortable on a phone as it is on a laptop, they can actually access their learning still. So that's been okay. The concern that we've had obviously is food for our free school meals children. So in some cases, we've delivered ready meals, and we did that for a case where a student came in, developed symptoms during the day and had to go home. And obviously the household then had to isolate. So what we didn't want to do was give them a supermarket voucher, because that would have, not necessarily been very helpful. So we took a load of ready meals around for 2 weeks, and for the two children involved, the child and the sibling. In other cases now, we've sort of moved to providing vouchers. We've got a stock of vouchers, so that when a parent picks a child up, if they have to pick a child up who's isolated, we can just give them the voucher straight away, and that way we know that we've given them some resource to be able to ensure that their child is fed properly, like they would be if they were in school. I was going to government's invested heavily in our exam group, so year 11 and year 13, compared to others, because the content is so important in year 11 and year 13, because that's what they will be tested in at the end of this academic year. We were very lucky at Ringwood. We had very good take up of our remote learning through the lockdown period, but it's how well children remember that, exactly as Brian said earlier on. So we've invested in extra revision guides, we're investing in extra small teaching, one-to-one, and other sort of catch up. We've invested in paying teachers to make, and this is another great thing about remote learning and our new technologies, to make revision videos, which we never would have done before, which students can then have a bank of videos for to just watch and relearn and go over things that they hadn't done before. And we've also invested in an additional literacy worker, because we noticed in some of our lower years is literacy levels had gone backwards. So we're really focusing over the next 2 terms in bringing literacy at that skill level up in order to equip those children to be able to go forward. And then finally, just to the antigen testing, we've been able to link up with Public Health England, who's based in Salisbury, so we're only sort of 20 minutes away, to try and trial mass testing of a very quick and easy test, the lateral flow test, which gives you a result in sort of 15 to 20 minutes. And just sort of working out with them how easy is it to test the entire school. So we start that tomorrow with sixth form and staff, and we'll do the rest of the school next week for just volunteers only, for anybody that consents and volunteers. But what is particularly interesting about it is that as being part of the trial, we get an exemption from the normal rules where close contacts have to go into isolation, provided that the close contact tests negative, that they don't have any symptoms, and they agree to testing every couple of days through the period where they would be isolating. It's felt that those children can stay in school with all of those mitigations in place. So this is a potential way of keeping children in school, and also giving all of those reassurances about, you would be picking up asymptomatic cases, but also the real power is this might mean that children can stay in school, and also staff as well. So we're really excited about that, and we're really looking forward to getting that going and seeing what we learn. Right, I'm so sorry to have raced through all of that for you. I hope that's okay, and I'm happy to have questions.
That was amazing, Anne. Thank you for your, it was really, really interesting. I've got a list of people wanting to ask questions. Councillor Jackie Porter, you're first.
Thank you. That was absolutely brilliant, Leanne. Thank you so much. I've learned so much, even being a governor and sitting in governor meetings, to hear how a different school is approaching it. So actually, that's exactly the sort of governor training that we'd really appreciate. Because I think, that's exactly, to hear a different school's way of tackling something is really, really useful. So thank you very much indeed. I just want to understand what the antigen test exactly involves for the school. Does the public health come in to do it, or do you have to operate it yourselves?
Yes, a bit of both actually. It's the test itself is a nasal swab, so it's a quick sort of whiz round, and it's the lower part of the nose. It's not the nasal canal, so it's sort of fairly quick and easy. Tomorrow we have lots of public health staff supporting us. We've got training going on of our own staff at the moment. And then next week, we've got a couple of public health staff, about 10 of our own. And the idea is that schools then become self-supporting. The big question, of course, is capacity. And that will be the big question in my mind is, have we got capacity to do it as often as we would want to kind of going forward? And Public Health England have been really flexible with us in terms of saying, actually, you can, once you're trained, you can determine how often you'd want to test. If the infection rate suddenly went up in your area, you might decide it's time to test again, or you might just want to do it routinely, all of those sorts of things. So yes, it is falling on school staff, but that does give us the power to have the ability to choose how we use it going forward. So.
And it sounds like the best biology lesson ever.
For sure, absolutely. We've got some of our year 13 who want to be medics, and we're hoping that they can just observe the whole process and how it looks, and that kind of 20 minutes while the sample is maturing.
Thank you, Councillor Porter, and thank you, Leanne, for answering that question. Councillor Zilia Brooks.
Thank you, Leanne. Oh, that was absolutely lovely to hear all that good stories you've been telling and how difficult everything can be for you. Just to say, we know that children go back to school and they worry about a lot of things. So how do you support children who have mental health problems? Do you still have mental health nurses coming in, or do you have to go to CAMS to get support for those children?
Thank you. We've never had mental health nurses come into school at all. So we've sort of carried on the provision that we've always had. So first, to answer your question more widely, and then I'll be more specific. When all students came back, the very first activity that they all did in their tutor groups was to create a sort of tree of things they were worried about, and then things that were really positive that they'd learned about themselves through that period of school closure. And then we collated across each of the year groups the themes that were coming out, and it was very similar themes. They were worried that teachers would have forgotten who they were. They were worried that their friends had forgotten who they were. They were worried that they had forgotten everything. And it was a lot of, actually, if we get you back in and following the routines, you will fall back into place, and that is what's happened. And what was really good about having done that activity was that we could really determine our tutor programme and our PSHE provision to really hit those things that children told us that they were worried about. So for the majority, that has sort of really supported their transition back into school. Of course, there are a small group of children who are very, very anxious, some of whom who absolutely thrived during lockdown because they didn't have all of those additional social pressures that schools put on them. And we have a few cases where it is difficult for those students to come back in school, and they are subject to external agencies like CAMS with lots and lots of support around them. We've got a school counsellor in school, so she's deployed very, very regularly. We've got a team of pastoral support workers who aren't trained counsellors, a team of 4 of them, but they did spend the lockdown period upskilling themselves on lots and lots of mental and emotional health issues, and particularly about resilience, trying to build resilience in children in order to build their self-esteem and make them believe that they can do it and they will be successful, which is a good mitigation against some of those worries and anxieties. But no, we still, for the very complex cases, we still use external support like CAMS. Everything else we try to work with internally. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks. And does anyone else want to ask a question of Leanne at all? No. Well, thank you so much, Leanne. Oh, I do have one. Ian Potter, would you like to ask your question?
Apologies, Councillor Chad. I was a little I was just going to wait for you to finish that sentence of thanking her, and then I was raising my hand to just make a comment about the wider debate. So my apologies, I did it a little too soon.
No worries. Well, I'll continue. So thank you so much, Leanne, for coming along today. It has really been great to hear how your school have dealt with the COVID pandemic, and it's been wonderful to hear, and thank you so much, and please pass on our thanks to all your team as well for everything they're doing for our young people. It really is greatly appreciated.
A pleasure, and thank you so much for your kind words at the beginning about school staff. I'm really grateful that it's recognised the job that everybody's doing. So thank you very much. Would you like me to stay on the call, or would you like me to jump off?
It's totally up to you. We've got Ian wants to make a comment in a minute, and our next agenda item is post-16 education. So if you would like to stay on the call, you are more than welcome to.
Lovely, I will do. I'll stay in the background then, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, Ian, would you like to?
Thank you. I'd just like to add to Leanne's thanks that she just made of you recognising and your thanks at the beginning, and also to Brian, because this is one of the first meetings I've sat in, if you like, with politicians and others who have shown a real empathy to what's happening in the school system at the moment. And it's contrasting to how we're feeling with regard to the national discourse. And I don't know if there's an appreciation at the centre sufficiently that we do feel in the school sector that we are the only, if like industry sector, where we're expected to continue with the business model with very little modification with regard to the situation, the pandemic. And that is insufficiently recognised. And so listening to obviously Brian saying on occasions that he's making representations to the DFA, I would really, on behalf of the TLP and the whole of your employees and the school sector, would ask councillors to use any influence that they have towards the centre with regard to their disposition towards us on the front line. And you may have picked up in the way in which the arm of the law is being used to reverse decisions made by well-meaning governing bodies up in the northwest who know their communities. And what they actually know, in why they were thinking that it was a good idea to perhaps move into the Christmas period earlier, is that families will decide not to send their children in that week because if they get affected, they'll be self-isolating and they won't be able to have their Christmas. And I don't know if that's been understood by our politicians centrally in the centre. So I do ask that any conversations that you may be able to have with those who missed the opportunity that was there with regard to having a circuit break at half term, and of course we probably could have not needed the 4 weeks that we've just had, or that we're getting towards the end of, had we taken that opportunity of when the schools were out for half term to do a circuit break there. So if you could please advise those at the centre to be listening to their profession and their leaders, and there's no need for anybody to take the high moral ground with regard to children needing to be in schools. Head teachers and teachers never come into this profession in order to not be doing their best for young people. And as Brian pointed out, secondary schools at the moment are clearly the ones more likely to close. And the short-sightedness about the implications that will have on the examinations next summer, I would really ask those of you who do have an in to Westminster to be looking at the other jurisdictions in the UK with regard to them being less myopic about it, because we know that coming out of the Christmas, and quite rightly, families enjoying themselves, there will be a further spike in January, February, which will lead to us having to manage those, and that will impact on decisions. And we've got year 11 and sixth formers at the moment in England not knowing what the situation is, but looking back over the last year and predicting that there will need to probably be a further U-turn on the position that's been taken. Please support us. We're working hard. Really appreciate the way Hampshire, the disposition towards your employees and your families is so much more positive than it feels nationally. I thank you for that, and would ask you to consider how you might be influencing those at the centre to be having a meeting a little bit more of this agenda item that I've just experienced. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I'm sure we've all noted that, what you have said, so thank you for that. I've got Justin that wants to say a few words as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, following from Ian's point, really, it's just a concern that head teachers in special schools have with obviously schools breaking up on the 18th of December. And a concern is that obviously if there are any positive cases in schools, God forbid, in those last couple of days, with a test and trace going back 48 hours, you're going to have a concern that, you know, contacting families, then you have to self-isolate during that Christmas period, including the 23rd to the 27th of December. I think that's going to put heads in quite difficult positions, informing families they have to self-isolate for 14 days. And a lot of families, I don't think, are going to do that. I think heads will do all they can, but making counsellors aware that I think it's going to be very difficult for heads having those conversations with families about self-isolating for 14 days if there's a positive case in the last 2 days of the term.
Thank you, Justin. Finally, I've got Councillor Zilia Brooks that would like to come in.
Sorry, yes, that was one of my questions I was going to ask Brian about, is the are you finding more children are being homeschooling since the pandemic started? And then, because as when they've been sent home and the mothers, and as you say, the parents are home, and so have you found that the homeschooling numbers have gone up?
It's a really interesting question, and it depends on when you look at the data. So during the summer term, the rate of elective home education went down in Hampshire. And I don't think that's surprising because school wasn't compulsory. So why would you register that you're electively home educating during that period? So between March and July, the figures were showing a decline. We've seen an increase during September and October. I haven't seen the end of November figures, obviously, yet, so we have seen an increase. The other bit, just so you're aware, because it often comes as a shock to people, the average length of time somebody home educates in Hampshire is between 4 and 6 months. So people don't become electively home educated and then electively home educate for long periods of time, quite often with the majority of children in Hampshire. So typically at points of transition, typically when something goes wrong in a school, those are the kind of times when people might electively home educate for a few weeks or months, and then they then look for another school place and they go back into school. So there's a lot of churn, but generally speaking, yes, at the end of October compared to October 19, the numbers were up in Hampshire, and we are having to employ some additional staff to undertake some more home visits because of the potential safeguarding concerns that can bring.
Lovely, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, I think now is the time to move on to item 7, which is the post-16. Oh, sorry, I apologise. I do have to take the recommendations actually for the last one. So can I just get an agreement that the panel notes the contents of Brian's presentation, please?
Noted, Chairman.
And can we say thanks to Leanne for coming today to take the time? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so now I can move on to item 7, which is the post-16 education. This will be Brian and Philip Walker that will deliver a Have we got a presentation for this one as well? Yeah, deliver a presentation to us, and we'll welcome questions at the end. So I shall hand over to you, Brian, and to Philip.
And I'm going to swiftly defer to Philip because he's the expert in this area.
Your delegation skills are inspiring, Brian. Thank you. Hello all, and thank you for the opportunity to come along again to this meeting. Hopefully the item hasn't been falsely billed as post 16. I absolutely will cover a range of things that are happening, and of course happy to take questions as well around the wider agenda. I am going to major though on the Kickstart scheme, which is the government's initiative to support youth employment. Also give you a flavour of the other initiatives that we are busy applying, and again, of course, to take any questions that you might have as a consequence. So the technology does work, we know that, so hopefully this will stand up. I'm going to try and share some slides with you now, if you bear with me a moment, please. Unless somebody shouts, otherwise I'm going to assume you can see that. Please let me know. So thank you. So as I say, happy to give a wider update, but the slides major on the Kickstart scheme. And I wanted to provide a bit of context before going into the slides proper. So strength base is the motto of the day, and on that basis, members and colleagues will be aware that in what stood for normal times, Hampshire had a very strong record in relation to youth participation, specifically post-16, and indeed employment levels across the wider population. We are of course not immune to events, and the impact of the pandemic has been significant and continues to be. And I think this slide demonstrates that. So in relation to young people, the number of young people who are not in education, employment and training actually has remained in line with the last 12 months. As happens whenever there is an economic downturn, participation in education and training tends to go up. And we are seeing, as I say, in September, a maintenance of the level of young people who are participating, and consequently maintaining the relatively low level of young people who are NEET. Nationally, the rate is around 4%. I recognise this data is now 2 months old, but our data is broadly similar today, around 1.7 to 1.9% of young people are being NEET. The September guarantee this year also went well, again reflecting that strong move towards level participation in education and training. The September guarantee is a statutory entitlement to young people aged 16 and 17 to a place in learning, and 97.5% of young people in Hampshire had a formal offer as of the end of that month. Now that compares to about 94% nationally. So again, Hampshire historically has performed well on these measures and continues to do so. But behind that is a concerning and increasingly challenging position. If we look at DWP data on claimant count, so these are individuals claiming work-related benefits or universal credit, you can see that the movement over the last 12 months has been significant and more than tripling in total. So 16 to 24 claimants, so young people, young adults, has moved from 1.8 to 6.1%. The October figure is similar to that, so it has levelled off. We were anticipating a further spike at the end of the furlough scheme, but the change in government policy has meant that's not happened to date. It may be coming further down the line, but that didn't happen at the end of October as anticipated. And that rise in youth unemployment is reflected in the wider population as well. Proportionately, again, as happens when there's an economic downturn, the impact on younger people tends to be greater. Just to note, the 16 to 24 claimant, of course, does include 16 to 18-year-olds, and that's the statement of the obvious from me there, but I make the point because actually very few young people aged 16 to 18 actually claim work-related benefits. Of that 7,600, the count will probably be in the tens. Now it does change week to week, month to month, and more than one is too many, but proportionately, the vast majority of that count will be young people aged 19 to 24. So some context that I wanted to provide you for the following slides. In the summer, the government announced its plan for jobs, making available £30 billion in total across a number of different initiatives. This includes the furlough scheme and formerly known as the job retention scheme, of course. Its aim is to support individuals to find jobs, those that have found themselves unemployed as a result of the pandemic, or indeed, of course, were unemployed prior to the pandemic hitting, and supporting them particularly into sectors where we might see job growth going forward. More people are in work than out of work, of course, so as important, probably more important, is the ability to help people to develop their skills and retrain perhaps, both to retain their employment and move again into those sectors where we anticipate future demand. More specific to the item today, the plan for jobs had a particular emphasis on supporting young people because of that aforementioned disproportionate impact. And the central programme to do this is called Kickstart, which launched in November. The Kickstart scheme is an initiative which provides paid job placements. So these are, in legal terms, jobs, although referred to as placements. They are jobs and participants have employee status, targeting 16 to 24-year-olds who are on universal credit. And I emphasise that point because actually we know there are young people who are economically inactive beyond those claiming benefits, but the scheme is only for those on universal credit. So perversely, in some cases, we might be looking to support some young people to access universal credit in order to come onto this scheme. There's no minimum duration that you have to be claiming those benefits to access Kickstart, although we are seeing in the early days proportionally more individuals being referred who've been claiming for 6 months or more. But that's not a formal criteria within the scheme. The programme provides 100% of wages at the national minimum or living wage, that's age dependent, for up to 25 hours a week for 6 months maximum. So the government will pay at that rate. Employers can choose to employ people beyond 25 hours, but they have to pick up 100% of the cost beyond that. The scheme also pays pension and national insurance contributions to the employer. So in theory, from a financial perspective, it's cost neutral to the employer. Clearly there are other costs, and to support those other costs, there is a £1,500 grant per placement that goes to the employer to cover costs, and we've referenced there, such as equipment, DBS checks, perhaps some initial training, and from our perspective, most importantly, careers guidance, because these are only 6-month placements, and whilst it's a welcome investment in youth employment, we're particularly concerned to ensure that the experience is used to support individuals into sustainable employment at the end of the 6 months. The scheme runs until 2022, meaning placements can start from November, so from now up to the end of 2021. So what are we doing as a local authority? It's an area where, of course, we've been very active historically, but we are moving to move the Kickstart scheme specifically. And we've committed as an employer to provide a minimum of 30 placements over the next 12 months. Our hope is that we can go beyond that, but at the moment our commitment is to a minimum of 30 placements. And I'll pick up reference to that number in a moment because it comes out of the way in which the government has designed the scheme. Our hope, of course, as always, is that we can prioritise placements for young people who are care leavers or young people who are, have an additional disadvantage. But again, the criteria which will allow us to do that is that they also must be claiming universal credit. Of course, we won't be targeting those groups exclusively, and there is a wider and growing talent pool amongst this cohort now. And one of the features, of course, in that now 7,000 plus count of young people claiming benefits, that we're seeing an increasing proportion of young people who are well skilled and highly skilled, and certainly highly qualified, with a increasing number of graduates starting to claim benefits, particularly those who graduated last summer. We don't have any specific data on that, but certainly some of the comments we're getting from DWP is that the profile of the unemployed group is changing. So as an employer, we're looking to provide at least 30 placements. We're also supporting other employers, and particularly in the public sector, to access the scheme. So I mentioned the reference to 30 there. So the way the scheme has been designed is that if as an employer you are offering 30 or more placements, you deal directly with DWP and all the joys associated with that. But if you're an employer offering less than 30 placements, then you have to access the scheme through a gateway organisation. And this gateway organisation effectively facilitates the placements by helping you with job profiling, filling out the paperwork, quite literally, filling out the paperwork in some cases. The gateway provider also acts as the funding conduit. So the gateway provider draws down the money from DWP and passports that on to companies offering less than 30 placements. The primary gateway provider in Hampshire is the Chamber of Commerce, but also the Federation of Small Businesses. So as not to compete or replicate their efforts, the County Council is focusing on supporting the public sector, but including schools and academies that want to access the scheme. And so far that seems to be working well. We are at the very early stages, but we are close to being able to submit our first batch of 30 placements to the DWP. That's drawing on placements being offered by primarily district councils across Hampshire. We're keen to submit that soon because we understand there's now a 6-week waiting list to process these applications. So the system's creaking a little, but we're keen to start this as soon as possible. What we're also doing as an employer, as a county council, is supporting employers with any training needs and particularly career support that individuals might have, and we're doing that through our Employment and Skills Hub. So a team of qualified careers practitioners can provide that support if needed. Initial amount is provided free of charge. We do draw down some funding as a gateway organisation, but then employers can access that £1,500 that I talked about earlier to provide any additional support that they feel is required. I haven't referenced explicitly, but would want to work with the social care and community care teams, where we're working with a growing number of care homes now who are exploring their capacity to access this scheme. And we've been able to also marry that to access to our levy funds, and I'll pick that up more substantially later. So As an example, we're looking at how a young person could start a 6-month placement through Kickstart, and at the end of that, if it's successful, move into an apprenticeship where the apprenticeship funding is funded through the transfer from the county council. So joining these things up, I think, is an important role that we have with the local authority. So that whilst each initiative has merit in its own right, it's actually the connections between them, I think, that's going to ultimately add value and have impact. I won't linger on this, I've touched on this a little bit, but DW guidance is clear and that Kickstart placements should not be replacing existing roles or any planned vacancies. Although the planned vacancies is an interesting one to police, because of course an employer at the moment might feel that accessing support from government for 6 months is actually what's going to secure that vacancy in the first place, and might a vacancy that they might otherwise not offer. Of course, Kickstart should not be used to replace existing employees, and again, part of our role is to police that as best we can, although ultimately it's a DWP responsibility. I'm pleased to say we're not seeing any evidence of that so far at all, but quite rightly these are aspects of the scheme that the government has been clear about. And then the other points, as I say, I've touched on already. The reference to being job ready is an interesting one, because of course anyone needs a proper induction and proper guidance on any new role. But I think the point is that given they are 6 months in duration only, the majority of time should not be taken up on training, but be able to really hit the ground running as soon as possible. This slide also picks up some of those earlier points, particularly around being work ready and prepared for the world of work. And again, the changing profile of the cohort means that we are seeing or likely to see young people who have got significant work experience, as well as those with perhaps less experience. The County Council itself is looking to make sure that we do create skills development opportunities, but also put in place the right type of support for young people to make sure it's a successful placement, both for the employer and for the individual. And alongside the expected sort of supervisory line management arrangements, we're looking at how we can also provide mentors to young people through the scheme. There's also support from DWP work coaches. You might be aware that I believe this goes back to the £30 billion investment. DWP are doubling the number of work coaches available to support individuals, and that's in anticipation not only of the rising unemployment we're already seeing, but the future expected rise. And of course today the Chancellor will be making further announcements and potentially further investment in this agenda too. As well as informing you, this is a bit of a promotion. We certainly would encourage schools and colleges and other settings to consider whether they have the capacity at the moment to provide a 6-month paid placement through the Kickstart scheme. I absolutely, as I say that, recognise the challenges we've heard about this morning that our schools are facing, so that probably seems a little bit of a tall order. But nonetheless, I think it's a legitimate point to ask you to at least consider this option. We know there are potentially roles around site maintenance and safety, around additional administrative tasks that schools might be taking on. There is an opportunity here to bring in talent and have that placement fully funded through this scheme, and potentially add some capacity to respond to the pressures you're currently facing. You will have these slides, of course, but just to highlight, Katie Matthews is project managing this scheme for us, and her email is there and on the Outlook system too. So that's Kickstart, and I've got a few other points I wanted to make, but I'm happy to pause there before moving on.
Does anyone have a question about the Kickstart scheme? Councillor Becky Porter.
Thank you. How is this being relayed to schools and to any other of the educational establishments that we're working with at the moment? And how widely do students know that if they actually start young people start applying for DWP money, they can only be on the Kickstart scheme if they actually are applying for universal credit? Because it has to, we have to have the pool as well as the jobs, don't we?
We do. So in relation to schools, so Katie Matthews is doing a roadshow around various groups to promote the scheme and to offer support to access the scheme. A schools communication has either gone out or is pending as well. I know it's not a silver bullet, but another route to communicate. And also DWP primarily are looking to promote this. Now, how effective they are in accessing schools, I think is probably open to debate. But primarily the role of DWP is to promote the scheme, both to claimants, their clients, that they refer to them, as well as to employers. Post-16, I think there is a good understanding amongst colleges, and indeed some colleges have been considering whether they want to act as an intermediary gateway organisation themselves. And in most places, and this stands for us as well, what we're doing is promoting this alongside our apprenticeship programme and promoting the connect between the two. So employers don't see this exclusively as a 6-month placement and then to replace by another 6-month placement, but as the first part of a longer commitment and investment in an individual. It's an interesting point to which I don't have a full answer around how, to what extent young people are aware of this. Again, I refer back to the DWP's role, but I'm sure there's more we could and do here as a local authority. We do facilitate a Hampshire Careers Partnership network where DWP and other careers providers attend, and there's representation from different phases. So again, that's a forum for which we should be exploiting that forum to promote these things.
Yes, because we had a presentation at P&R Policy Committee, Scrutiny Committee, which implied that the number of young people who actually were unemployed was higher than the number you brought out here, and that was a July number. It may be different now because of the way in which the world has moved on and lots of people have gone back to college or whatever, so it may be different. But my comment is that if a young person knows that potentially they can only be on the Kickstart scheme if they're actually applying for universal credit or in receipt of, it may change the number of people who are making that decision rather than just going home to live with mum and dad.
Yes, absolutely. You'll appreciate that the claimant count changes every month and will have changed from the figure I presented to you from September already. And there are unfortunately competing measures of unemployment. The claimant count tends to be the one we use to be consistent, but there's figures around economically inactive and others. I think that the bottom line for me, the reference I make, consistent that we are looking at least a tripling of the numbers.
Absolutely.
And that gives us cause to respond. But thank you. That question has sort of prompted an action I think we need to take.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. I've got Councillor Michael Westbrook next, who has a question.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Philip. I just wanted to, we had a recent Children and Young People Select Committee back in September. The Independence Futures team talked about a point about the Learning Disability Plan Review of 2018, where people with learning disabilities and their carers said that one of the most important things to them was employment. And I asked at that meeting, I asked Councillor Chad at that meeting about what we were doing and whether the Kickstart scheme would help young people with learning difficulties. And I suppose for them to get back into work at this time, many of them would probably have been disproportionately affected during COVID, And I wonder how much of an impact this Kickstart scheme would help for them. And along the lines that Councillor Porter has just mentioned, how will they be aware of the situation and take advantage of it where possible?
One of the points I perhaps was remiss in not referencing to Councillor Porter's question is, of course, we also operate a careers service, and we work alongside the National Careers Service, which is a contracted out operation by the DfE. So those various careers organisations will have this information to promote to individuals that they are engaging with, either proactively or reactively. I don't have any data specifically around young people with SEN or learning difficulties, but just to clarify, to be eligible to access the Kickstart scheme, you have to be claiming universal credit, but also not enrolled on a full-time course. So we are doing a lot, and I'll come on in a moment to highlight this, to support more young people with special educational needs to develop their employability skills and move into work. The key initiative at the moment is our SEND employability hubs. But the young people in those provisions are deemed full-time students, and so the Kickstart scheme wouldn't be an option for them unless they stopped becoming students, either, and hopefully that's from a positive perspective, by completing their course successfully and progressing. But of course, completing their course successfully, from our perspective, would be moving them straight into employment. But where that's not possible, we'd certainly want to access the Kickstart scheme where that's relevant to the individual. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a broad response to an important question, but there's that distinction there between young people who are designated as students and those who are not.
No, thank you, Peter. I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westbrook. I've got one last question on Kickstart, and that's from Councillor Zilia Brooks, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a question about if a young person was on this scheme and then we had our first lockdown, were they put on furlough or did they have to go back onto the benefits scheme?
We haven't had anybody yet in the County Council. There have been 19,000 places offered nationally. We understand the majority of those were from the supermarkets. Tesco's in particular, I think, have committed to several thousand placements. I'm not aware of any young people starting the scheme and then being furloughed. I think, though technically that might be possible, that would be running against the spirit of the scheme, and certainly I'd be surprised if, well, an employer offering an opportunity probably feels there is a need not to furlough. They have a capacity issue and therefore aren't looking to furlough individuals. Of course, circumstances will change, and every employer might have a different circumstance. So technically it's possible. We've not yet seen it feature.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Does anyone else have any questions for Philip about the Kickstart scheme? No. Philip, are you okay to continue with those last few points you wanted to?
Of course, and thank you. Thank you for those questions, and also I think some of those questions relate to the points I wanted to put across here. So I think I came to this group actually and talked about the development of a Hampshire Skills Strategy earlier in the year. That sort of was quietly launched in March because there were other headline matters at the time, but it does exist, and we'll be looking to refresh and promote that again soon. But what we have done is develop a skills recovery plan to respond to the immediate sort of situation. And that draws from the strategy, but also looks to be responsive to specific and particular challenges that we're now facing. And I thought it'd be helpful just to share some of those with you. and to categorise those as I have here. So in relation to apprenticeships, the levy programme continued, so we continue to put 0.5% of our wage bill into a digital account every month. That's not changed through this pandemic, and that pot continues to grow. So we are seeing starts within the organisation, and a few, but very few, in schools still. We are anticipating a sort of delayed upsurge in starts for the County Council's levy programme to later this year, or now probably more realistically, start of 2021, particularly in some of the more operational areas, although operational capacity is a key consideration given the demands of the apprenticeship programme. So there's a fine balance there, but we are expecting more internal apprenticeship starts throughout this year. What we've also done in response to the circumstance of the day is increase the amount of money we've made available from the levy to transfer to other employers outside of the organisation, and that now stands at a commitment of £2 million to 2021. And I'm pleased to share with you that just this week we passed the commitment of £1 million. So we've now committed half that £2 million total to support apprenticeships with employers across Hampshire. The majority, proportionately, are in the health and social care sector, which we see as a real benefit. We're also doing that work with reference to the new apprenticeship hubs that are either established or in the process of being established. So, perhaps ironically, thanks to European social funds, we now have 2 apprenticeship hubs in operation, one covering the Solent area, one covering North Hampshire and East Surrey. And the purpose of these is to promote apprenticeships to employers, particularly small employers. So they're effectively broker operations to help employers understand apprenticeships and design an apprenticeship programme for their organisation. And of course, what we can now do as well is offer them some funding for the training element as well through the levy transfer scheme. So we're really excited about that. We hope to reach over 500 small employers in North Hampshire alone, slightly more total number across the Solent, but including the cities, between now and 2023, and as a result creating over 1,000 apprenticeship starts. So these are programmes that were in plan anyway before March this year, but I think even more relevance and importance now we find ourselves in this position. The actions in relation to young people specifically, picking up on Councillor Westbrook's question, we launched this year, the intention was to launch 4 employment hubs for young people with special educational needs. In fact, 3 are operational. The 4th was delayed until 2021. So we have 51 young people starting supported internships. This is where they are attend college for a proportion of the week to develop their employability skills, but also, of course, their English, maths, IT skills, and then undertake extended work placements to develop those skills in situ. I need to put across to you the reality, which is that finding work placements at the moment is challenging, particularly during the lockdown, and we have a team working very, very hard. The positive response rate at the moment is 3%, but we are making hundreds of calls every week, not thousands, to try and generate those opportunities. We know there is support for this, broad support for this initiative, but it's the reality that many employers face at the moment about not having the immediate capacity. We would hope that situation changes as we go into 2021. We've also increased the number of traineeships available. These are pre-apprenticeship programs, a sort of fast track for young people who are not quite ready to start an apprenticeship, but could do within sort of 2 to 6 months. Again, we've offered more opportunities there. There's certainly more placements available, and the government has made more money available for traineeships. but they're a programme that's premised on undertaking extended work placements. And we're facing the same challenge there to find employers who can provide those extended work placements. At the moment, it is proving somewhat challenging. A sort of strategic piece of work, we're working with Southampton, Portsmouth, the Isle of Wight, and leading a application to the new Youth Futures Trust for a £5 million long-term youth employment programme targeting care leavers and those young people coming out of alternative education settings. We're excited about that. We've got through the first round. It's highly competitive, as you can imagine, but we feel going forward as a joint local authority bid gives us a good chance of securing that, and we'll know by next spring and be happy to report back here the outcome of that bid. In relation to adults specifically, every year we make available over £1 million for our adult and community learning programme. So this year, no different. 1.3 million has been commissioned out. By commissioned out, that includes our library service as one of our biggest providers of adult learning. But we've placed an increased emphasis on employability and digital skills as well. Coming to a community venue or library near you soon should be a full programme, including the option to undertake a digital skills course. I should give credit to our partners here, which includes schools, third sector organisations, and of course our own library service. In March, we maintained as much adult learning as was possible, but almost exclusively via digital learning. So that will continue. That's, I think, one of the positive legacies of the pandemic. We will see a blended offer, but digital learning will feature more prominently, I think, than it has historically in our adult learning programme. And I think that's a good thing as we seek to continually reach more people with that offer. And finally, I just want to make reference to the Work-Based Academies. This is a DW initiative where they have a cohort of individuals, not just young people, who are looking at live opportunities in a particular sector. They undertake some intensive training. In this instance, we've supported them with training for the care sector, and then it guarantees them an interview upon completion of that work. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to see how these things connect locally, and we'll certainly be looking at how that initiative links to the Kickstart scheme. And finally, from me, I want to highlight again the Construction Skills Fund. We will now have a £2.5 million programme in total, and the aim is to reach 1,600 individuals to give them initial training in order to access a new career in the construction sector, where there is demand, and we anticipate significant future demand, particularly as more infrastructure programmes are brought online. Conscious of time, probably overrun as always. Apologies for that, but I'm happy to pause again.
Thank you, Philip. The time it's this so important that we show members what we are doing for our young people and our older learners as well. Does anyone have a question for Philip in regards to those few pieces? No. Well, thank you so much.
Will we get a copy of these? They're really useful.
I'm sure we.
Will we get a copy of these slides, Philip? They're really useful.
Absolutely, Councillor Ford. Yes.
Okay.
And if
a members' briefing would be brilliant.
Chairman, if I could just interrupt, it's Louise. I wonder whether Brian and Philip would be able to give me the presentations, and I can not only upload them to ModGov but also to the website, so that all members can have copies of the slides, if everyone's happy to.
Yeah, is that okay, Philip and Brian?
Absolutely. Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you so much, Philip, for going through that with us. really has been very interesting, and yeah, and very actually positive, that we are able to do these for our young people. Can I just ask that the panel notes the contents of the presentation for the recommendation, and that we thank Philip for his time today as well.
Definitely.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance today.
Sorry, Chairman, could we just ask Philip to stop screen sharing and then we can carry on with the meeting?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
He's gone.
Is he gone?
Hello, no, I'm here. I'm just working out how I stop screen. Yes, I shall do that. So.
Thank you.
I think it's the button towards the left of the leave button. There's a box with an up arrow in it,
yes,
which should be a cross if you click on there.
It doesn't have a cross in it. Leave, it may go, so I'll attempt to do that. Thank you.
There we are.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and also to once again just, I think as a panel we are very, very grateful for all the hard work that is taking place in our schools, with Brian and his team and with public health, and we just would like that noted. I feel as a panel that we really do thank you all at this time. I need to ask now to stop the webcast, please.